in order to grow your channel and have a following, whenever one of those several thousand people click on the thumbnail, you've got 15 or 20 seconds. Basically, that's the rule of thumb, is you've got 15 or 20 seconds to keep them on the video. Most of them are going to click away because they aren't impressed by the person. They're not impressed by the video. It's not worth their time to watch it because there are millions and millions of other videos they could be watching. So it doesn't make sense for a person to click on the thumbnail and then watch 15 or 20 seconds, be totally bored with the video or totally uninterested, and stay there and watch the rest. So that's sort of... Welcome back to the Describe Your World podcast, and this is episode 13. Today I don't have a guest, which it's interesting because we haven't done one of these so far in which I'm just recording and talking by myself. So it should be an interesting experiment. Very curious to see what people will think about it, if it'll be just as effective or if it's really like the conversation and interaction with people that makes all the difference. So, but I'm here by myself, which is okay. And I do have something planned for next week. So if you're watching or listening and you're curious about the next guest is going to be a paranormal historian and a paranormal investigator slash storyteller, someone who also has a podcast, and he talks about ghosts and spirits and all things spooky. So that should be a really cool experience and a really cool thing to dive into. So we will be working together next week, and that episode will go up sort of toward the end of next week. And then I already have some people lined up for January as well. So we're going to keep on with guests and continuing to do the typical interviews. But today, for this week, I didn't have anybody. So I thought I would try something a little different and push the boundary a little bit, put myself out there and just do something by myself. So it'll be pretty cool to see what the response is to that. So I have a few topics written down. I took some notes beforehand of things that I wanted to talk about, things that I thought would be interesting and enjoyable to sort of discuss. And it would be cool if you hear anything that it intrigues you or that you have a response to, if you'll go down to the comment section if you're on YouTube and leave a comment in response to it. It's one thing that is really important for podcasting is engagement. So if you are a listener or a viewer or someone who is kind of engaged with or interacting with the podcast, clicking the like button, clicking the follow button, clicking the notification button, leaving a comment, all of those things are really important. That's how you help grow the podcast. That's how you can best support the podcast. It's kind of interesting as a creator because it used to be that the subscribe button was a really powerful button. And the like button was helpful as well. But subscribe was a big thing because when you subscribe to something, that means you are notified basically of new content. So for a creator, if someone's willing to click subscribe, that means that person is making almost a commitment to getting a notification whenever you put out a new video or a new episode or a new piece of content. And that's not really true anymore because now if you're a subscriber, the YouTube algorithm might suggest the video to you. It might put it in front of you on your homepage or your feed. But unless you click that notification bell, you don't really get an alert that lets you know there's a new episode out or available. And the same thing is true on platforms like Spotify. If you are following the podcast, that's great because it's going to show up. It's going to pop up for you. But if you click the notification button or the notification bell, then you actually get a pop-up on your phone or on your tablet or whatever that lets you know that there's a new episode to watch. So for those who are curious about content creation and those who are supporting and following the podcast, all of those different things are helpful, but just letting you know that engagement and those notification alerts are really important. So outside of that, kind of want to talk about a few topics, and I have some interesting things to go into. The first of which is a video that I watched this week, and it actually is connected to several other topics in my list here. But this video was a video of Jordan Peterson, and it was about 9 minutes. And I saw it originally on Laid Backs. He's a reaction channel. He has a reaction channel where he normally does music, but he also has some other types of content like paranormal and political stuff. And he just sort of pulls up these clips and he reacts to them, comments on them and things like that. But I saw the video on his channel. So he reacted to the Jordan Peterson content, and then it made me want to just discuss it because I thought it was interesting. So I think the title of the video was something like why 90% of people are here. Let me just pull it up since I have the ability to do that. So the title is The Simple Reason 90% of Men Are Lost in Life. That's the name of the video if you want to go check it out for yourself. I can also leave a link to it in the description of the episode, so it'll be easy for you. Basically, the concept is this: responsibility and purpose and meaning of life are all connected to each other. And why is that? Why is Jordan making that point? So he's sort of starting from the position of people who are experiencing depression or experiencing just kind of a slump or unable to be motivated and unable to like motivate themselves to do things, often are people who don't have a destination or a goal sort of at the end of their path, and they are not prepared for really anything. They're just sort of floating through life and not kind of toting any kind of load. And that's really the basis and the thesis of this video. And he's sort of making a contrast as well between men and women. So that's the other piece of it, is he's contrasting men and women, and he's trying to understand why a lot of men feel like they're lost, because why are they unmotivated? Why are they in this slump? Why are they unable to push themselves forward? And why is it that it's not the case for as many women? So part of it, Jordan suggests, is that women are more agreeable. And so they in a general sense, now not all women are agreeable people, or not all women tend toward agreeableness, but in general, he's making the suggestion that women are more agreeable. So, as long as there's an agreeable pathway to attainment, as long as there's some sort of movement, or they have their arrow is pointed at something, they tend to be very content, and they just sort of follow the direction given. Whereas with men, if they don't want to do something, they just aren't going to do it. They're less likely to comply. They're less likely to be compliant. And they aren't interested in doing activities that aren't enjoyable or meaningful. Whereas women, maybe a little more agreeable, maybe tend to pursue something as long as it's instructed, or as long as it's put in front of them. It just seems to be more of a general sense of things. And then he mentioned rights without responsibility. So he makes a point that you can't have one without the other. So we're talking about rights, and that's an important topic, and that's something that's extremely relevant right now. But how does responsibility play into that, and what is your meaning or your purpose? And so Jordan sort of makes the point that these two things are interrelated, and you can't have one without the other. So one of the more passionate arguments, or one of the more passionate statements that he has in the video, is he says you have to lift the load so you can tolerate yourself. Lack of self-respect. If you don't have something to carry, and you don't have a goal or something to work toward, you sort of have this like distaste for yourself, or you feel like you have a lack of self-respect, and you have a lack of usefulness. And that's something that he thinks is more significant for men than women. Because women, he suggests, have some natural inclinations, like the nurturer or the caregiver. They have these roles that sort of fall into place that are more generally like a default setting. And so they have more opportunity to be useful and to be helpful, and to accomplish things, or more goals to look forward to. Whereas men, if they're just left to their own devices and they don't have that load to carry, they don't have that responsibility, they're sort of left in an empty place. And I could totally understand that. That makes sense to me. He uses the example of Homer Simpson. So the episode that he's referencing from The Simpsons is episode 1, and he deconstructed the episode. So he took a look at what was the premise, what is important about this situation, and what real life values are built into the episode or in place. And he looks at Homer Simpson as a character, as a case study, and suggests that Homer's sort of this bumbling fool of a guy who is supposed to be comedic relief and funny in a lot of ways. but Homer actually suffers a lot whenever he's unable to provide for his family at Christmas time. So he doesn't get the bonus at work or something related to that he needs to help pay for Christmas gifts and for his family to have a nice holiday season. And it sort of crushes him, and he begins to suffer because he doesn't have the ability to provide. And so I think Jordan really latches on to that, and he builds that into his argument and makes it a significant point, because Homer's suffering because he can't provide. Homer's suffering because he doesn't have that sense of value, and he's unable to tolerate himself. He's hurting. And so the takeaway from that is people need to pull against something. People need some kind of weight to pull against. And as a result, he mentions the opiate epidemic. Why is it that so many middle-aged unemployed men are sort of bound by opiate addiction? Why is it that they sort of try to drown out their sorrow and their suffering by, using these drugs? And part of it is because they're lacking that motivation. They're lacking that weight to pull and that weight to carry. And it's really interesting. I would love to know what your thoughts are. If you're someone who's watching or listening, I would love to know how you feel about that. If you agree with it, if you don't agree with it. Jordan tends to be a relatively controversial figure from a political and a philosophical perspective. He does have some hot takes, of course. And, there are situations in which I think pretty highly of him. And there are some takes that I think are really favorable and things that I enjoy and appreciate. And then there are some things where I feel like it's a little intense and maybe he's not being really inclusive or fair to the subject matter, the people who are part of the study or the concept. But I did find that video to be really interesting because I do like to talk about on the podcast quite a bit meaning and purpose and value and things of that nature. So anytime I see something like that, it sort of catches my attention and I want to, sort of chime in or decide how I feel about it. But again, I will put a link to the video in the description and in the description of the episode on audio format as well, so that you all can go and watch it for yourselves, and hopefully you'll respond and let me know what you think about it. So moving on from that, talking about purpose and weight and sort of carrying the load, it sort of ties in. It's a nice segue into this next topic that I wanted to mention, which is I had a book idea. And it's kind of interesting because this happens to me 2 to 3 times a year, pretty much every year, and has for the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so. Whenever I was younger, there were a couple of times where I sat down and I wrote novel length, quote unquote, books that weren't really books, but they were me attempting to write because I love writing and my college degree is English and creative writing. And I've always sort of envisioned myself writing a novel or a self-help book or a nonfiction book or a novella, something similar, something long form, some type of long form content. So I have tried that a few times and I have gotten through a couple of longer pieces that didn't materialize or didn't resolve, which is okay because I think the benefit gained from that was just doing it. Just the writing itself was the part that was of value to me, and not so much getting something finished that was like publication ready, like ready to be published by someone. But I did have a book idea, and it really stemmed from a dream, which it normally does. Normally I have some type of dream, and the dream will be so intense or so vibrant that I will think, I have to create a book as a result of that. Sometimes when I wake up, if I have a similar experience, I'll grab my phone and I'll open my messages app and I'll text myself as much as I could remember from the dream, just in case in the future I wanted to go back to it and write about it. But in this situation, I did not write anything down because it wasn't so much that I want the dream itself to be the book, just the concept that was birthed as a result. But so my book idea, I thought it would be interesting to write a book, and I already have the title. Title is done, which is the hardest part for me. I'm really bad at titles. So the fact that I have the title makes it all the more real. So, so the book title would be Emily Schroeder's House is Alive, and the alive is in all caps, and then it has 3 exclamation points after it. It really sounds kind of campy. It sounds like an old 70s or 80s like slasher movie title, which I think is really funny. And it also sort of sounds like a young adult novel series. So it could be that if it were ever written, that it would be young adult. That might be where I would take it. But the concept is something like I really loved when I was in college and I was doing my graduate level, my upper English classes. What I really enjoyed was books or stories that were framing tales, which basically means that you have a narrator who is telling a story, but a big piece of that story is several smaller stories that are plugged into the story. So they construct the story using other stories or other tales. And Canterbury Tales, if you have by Chaucer, I think it's Geoffrey Chaucer. Canterbury Tales is the one that comes to mind, but that's sort of an really old example. I'm sure there are a lot of modern ones that you could check out, but I've always really liked those. They're a really cool concept because you can plug so much into the story, but also have everything be connected. So yeah, Emily Schroeder's House is Alive, all caps, exclamation points. And then I would try to plug in 3 or 4 small pieces that sort of frame the backstory of this house, so that it's sort of supernatural in theory, but it's really I think it would be an interesting take on, like the history of a location, the history of a place. But in the book, my theory was like you could take a story about maybe a woman who from like 50 or 60 years ago who was experiencing that oppressive patriarchal culture before the feminism movement or feminist movement really kicked off, and those things were challenged, or those rights were explored and really fought for. Someone who is experiencing that sort of oppression living in the house, and then her story, her narrative, her point of view. You can have sort of a futuristic story about a woman who's living in the house, who's experiencing paranormal activity or supernatural experiences from people who once lived in the house, or maybe someone from the future who has a totally different experience with the world, someone who doesn't have that oppressive life or those experiences. And then you could even go back further and you could talk about the construction of the house. What was the very first story? What was the first family like? What was it like for the house to come up? What did it look like whenever it was originally built with the original fresh paint and the original construction? And somehow connect those pieces, have all the protagonist, if you will, be connected and linked to each other, but then also linked back to Emily Schroeder, who is I guess would be the current resident, the daughter of the family, or the current homeowner, or whatever. I don't really have a plan for her character, but she would be like the narrator who's telling the framing tale and who's, reliving all those memories or experiences and sort of telling the stories of the house. And then all of it could be about, ghosts or demons or something. I have no idea. I just think that it would be a fun story to tell. It would be something interesting to explore and to chew on, and to because one thing with me, I get really bored with writing after a while. I like to write short content because whenever I write longer pieces, I just get really bored and I run out of ideas. But with this, I wouldn't have to worry about that because every 10 chapters or so, I could change to the other perspective, the other narrator, and I could work through a different story entirely. But all of it still fleshes out the story of this house. It's just they're all separate experiences with separate characters. So it would be a little bit easier to write than trying to write a full-length book about one story with one set of characters, for sure. And then my wife and I were sort of joking about it because I thought, if it is a young adult novel, or if it is like, it could be a series really easily. Like you could have Emily Schroeder's House is Alive. You could have Emily Schroeder's House is Dead. You could have Emily Schroeder is Dead. You could just like keep going with all these different titles. and you could write stories that are like expanding upon the world. Just do more world building, new characters, new things are happening. And all the titles would be really funny. So it would be a great attention grabber, because when you see the title of the book, you're like, oh, I want to check that out. Definitely have to get some good art for the cover too. That way, someone, if they're not drawn in by the title, they're at least drawn in by the cover art. But yeah, I have I've had lots of ideas like that in the past. Normally they do come from dreams. And like I said, I will pull out my phone and go into my messages app and start taking notes for myself. But normally they don't materialize because I just don't have the time to write a full length novel or a full length book. I would have to commit to like 1,000 words a day, and I would have to stay on a schedule. It would probably take a few months, and then I'd have to do a lot of editing and revision, have to send it to a bunch of publishers, and it just sounds like a lot. So I think I'll stick to my short stories and my poems for now, and then maybe in the future, maybe down the road, if life is a little more open and there's a little more time available, I could write something like that. But yeah, if you think that's a cool idea and you're a writer or a creator out there in the world, please take it and use it, create something with it. Go ahead and write a novel or write a book series, and should you choose to, you're more than welcome to. I think it would be really cool, and send it to me if you ever do, so that I can read it, because I think it would be fun. So creativity sort of transitions into the next thing that I wanted to talk about, which was the theater. So my wife and I, and she really inspired this and pushed it along, but my wife loves Broadway, off-Broadway theater, like shows, anything like that, musicals, particularly Broadway shows. And I did not have much experience with them before I started going with her. I had been to one show that was outside of Asheville, North Carolina, outside of the mountains, and I think it was the Technicolor Dreamcoat show. Let me look up so I can make sure I give you the right title. I think it was Joseph Technicolor Dreamcoat. Let's see. Yes, the official title is Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. By Tim Rice. So that's the only one that I had seen prior to meeting my wife. And it was good, but it was sort of a passing thing that I didn't really latch onto, and I didn't pursue outside of the one show. I didn't pursue further, but I did enjoy it. But since I met my wife, it sort of started when she was really into Hamilton for a while, especially when we first started dating. That was just the big thing. She would watch it every week. And I started watching it and sort of learning some of the songs, and I thought it was pretty good. Extremely interesting to hear all the rap and the modern music that's built into it. I didn't expect that out of a show. I sort of thought I thought they were all sort of old fashioned and that sort of classical Broadway style. But Hamilton definitely changed my perspective and what I know to be possible with those shows. So we actually saw Hamilton in New York City together. We went to New York and we did a lot of different things, but one of the things we made a point to do was see Hamilton on Broadway. So that was the first show for us. And then we've seen The Lion King, we've seen Freestyle Love Supreme, we've seen Hadestown, we've seen Dear Evan Hansen, and we've seen Ain't Too Proud, the Temptations show. All of those shows off Broadway. So those have been like around the Charlotte area, in South Carolina for a couple of them, just in the Carolinas, because that's really our sort of home base in our area. But they've all been really good. I've enjoyed all of them. Seeing Lion King was just incredible. That's been my favorite out of them all. And I know it's sort of a cliche choice because it's the classic, probably the most famous Broadway performance of all time, but it really was, leagues above, in my opinion, just leagues above everything else. And just all of the costumes, the music, the performance, the emotion, everything that was plugged into it was just really powerful. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so we have a bunch of other shows planned for this coming year. Sort of a tradition at this point to put shows on the schedule and for us to go. And I really tried to get things that were in Charlotte or close to Charlotte just to make it a little easier for us to see them. But we went through and they had a schedule for I think sort of the back end of 22 into the full year of 23 at the theater that's closest to us. So went ahead and got tickets for several shows. Six was one of them. So Six is on the list for us to see. That's one that we're both pretty excited about. But there are several. There are 6 or 7 of them, and they flow through. Dear Evan Hansen was actually the first in the series, so that's the one we saw several weeks back, the most recent one. But that one was enjoyable too. Really good music in that one. So I'm curious if you're a listener or a viewer, if you can write a comment, tell me what your favorite Broadway off Broadway show is, why maybe it's your favorite, and should we go see it? And that would be cool if you've made it to this point and you like to leave a suggestion. I think that would be really nice. So definitely motivated to see more shows, and it's sort of a nice fill-in for reading because, again, I don't have a lot of time available, so haven't been reading a lot in 22, which is not too different from after college. Ever since college ended, I really sort of veered away from books and reading, and I read a lot while I was in college, and I read a lot prior to college. But just being in the workforce, sort of getting settled, buying a house, getting married, starting a family, those are all things that really prevent me from spending time with books, and I probably should read more than I do, but at least I have some other outlets like the shows and new music whenever I find something that really intrigues me or I'm passionate about. It's always a good experience. Sort of to touch on that, I found a song and then a band and albums sort of haphazardly. So this also ties into my next topic, which is reaction videos. So I was watching a reaction channel that I really like. I'm trying to remember which one because I've seen it on so many reaction channels, but I'm not sure which one was the first one. I think it was a guy, and I could never find the channel because it was really small at this point. But he is like a metal musician, and he reacts to music and music videos, and then he sort of breaks down the construction of the song, the music, the keys, the chords, and everything, so that you can sort of play along if you're intrigued by it or want to. But I think he was a metal musician, and I'm pretty sure that was the concept of his channel, which he will play parts of the song. He'll figure out what key it's in. He'll talk about all that stuff. But the song that I found was Awakening by Unleash the Archers. So if you haven't heard it and you're into music at all, please go listen to it because it's essentially my new favorite song. I've listened to it just about every day since I discovered it. And it's really got everything. It's like a power metal. I think it's the first song from the album that it comes from, and it's a concept album. So it really introduces the story of the album, but it's called Awakening. The band is Unleash the Archers. And let me tell you what album to look for because I think I know, but I don't want to be wrong just in case. So Awakening by Unleash the Archers from the album Apex. I was right. So I was pretty confident that the album was Apex, but I wasn't confident enough to just tell you to go find it. But it is a concept album, and there is a story plugged into the album, so be prepared for that. But I'm pretty confident that Awakening is one of the earlier songs, and it sort of talks about the main character of the story and how the character has sort of been living in this mountain, and the character essentially awakens in like a spiritual sense, and I guess other things ensue as a result. But that's the basic premise. And it's like a power metal ballad. It's this powerful, driving, fast-paced, really tight song. And the band is incredible. All the musicians are incredible. The singer, I think her name is Brittany Slays. I'm not going to look that up, but I'm pretty confident her name is Brittany Slays, and I think they're Canadian. I'm almost positive they're Canadian. But it's a beautiful song. It's got everything. The vocals are incredible. The guitar work is incredible. The bass work is incredible. Drumming is insane. And it's long, but you don't want it to end. So it's one of the songs that takes a while to get through, but then when it ends, you're really sad because you wish that there was twice as much to listen to because it's that good. It's really, really good. And so I heard Awakening, and then I checked out Apex because that's the album that it's from. And I sort of passively listened to Apex while I was running one morning. I went outside for a run, and that's the album that I chose to play through while I was running. So I sort of passively listened to it, but I enjoyed it a lot. And then they have an acoustic album, I think, that's either coming out or is already out. And they have reworked a lot of their songs acoustically, which is really cool. And then they have some other albums, some older stuff too, that you could check out. So that's currently my new favorite song, and a band that sort of haphazardly discovered while working down the YouTube rabbit hole, as it were. So please check them out. Please check out the album, the song, the band, and I don't think you'll regret it. Even if you only listen to the one song, I think you'll like it. Hopefully, if you like music. So segueing into my next topic, which is reaction videos. And the main question is, why are reaction videos so popular? Why are reaction videos so successful? Why do react channels have the success that they do? So I think part of what makes reaction channels so successful and why they have the response that they do is because, you're not only reacting to or watching something that you already know you enjoy or something that you already appreciate, but you're almost watching it with someone. So, you have someone who is sort of like, is almost like a sense of friendship whenever you're watching a reaction channel. The reactor themselves is expressing emotion. They are discussing and sometimes providing commentary on what they're watching. And it's almost like you're connected via dialogue, because a lot of these reactions are going to be songs and videos that you've seen before. At least that's how it is for me. When I look up, a reaction video, I'm looking for something that I know has already produced like a pretty heavy response in me, something that I think is moving or impactful, or like a song that's really good, or a video game or a movie that's really good. And I just want to see how other people feel about it, and I want to see their response to it. So there's almost a sense of camaraderie with the reactor whenever you go to one of these channels and you watch a video of something that you've already responded to at some point. And I think that's really cool. I think that's pretty powerful, that there's just this sense of not being alone. There's a sense of enjoying something with another person, a sense of getting to see what that excitement and that emotion looks like for the very first time on a person's face. I think that that's really powerful, and I think that's a huge part of why reaction channels are what they are. The other element, I think, for reaction channels and why they are so popular is the personality of the reactor. Because another time when I might watch something is not because I recognize the song or I recognize the video, but maybe I just like the reactor. Maybe the personality of the person watching is the reason that I'm coming back. I gave the example earlier about Laid Back, and Laid Back is someone who totally different from me from the perspective of like personality, upbringing, lifestyle, things like that. Definitely lives a totally different life than mine, and probably different in every other way as well, other than maybe spirituality. But his personality just draws me in. I really enjoy the way he talks. I enjoy the way he responds to things. I enjoy his insight. Feel like I learn something whenever he talks about his own relationship to the song or to the video. And I want to engage with that content. I want to leave a comment. I want to subscribe to the channel. I want to stay up to date when he creates new content. So that's sort of the big piece of content creation, is like, how do you grow and how do you be successful? And the way the YouTube algorithm works is YouTube will push your video out. Once it's published, YouTube will start pushing your video out to lots of different people, all sorts of different people. And it'll actually tell you in the analytics how many times it pushed it out. So it'll tell you how many impressions the thumbnail was pushed in front of. So like if it says it was 6,000 impressions, that's how many people had the opportunity to click on it, basically. And a lot of the time they won't. So you can't expect like a 90% click-through rate. You can't expect 90% of people to click on the video. You can expect like between 1% and like 9%. Maybe even less. In a lot of situations, less. But I think the average is somewhere from like 0.8% to like 8% or something similar to that. I read that somewhere and that could be wrong, but that's what I think is the average for like clicks. So in order to grow your channel and have a following, whenever one of those several thousand people click on the thumbnail, you've got 15 or 20 seconds. Basically, that's the rule of thumb, is you've got 15 or 20 seconds to keep them on the video. Most of them are going to click away because they aren't impressed by the person. They're not impressed by the video. It's not worth their time to watch it because there are millions and millions of other videos they could be watching. So it doesn't make sense for a person to click on the thumbnail and then watch 15 or 20 seconds, be totally bored with the video or totally uninterested, and stay there and watch the rest. So that's sort of the challenge of content creation, is I need to create something that is so electric for somebody or so interesting to somebody that they're willing to stay on board for a little while and they're willing to follow through. Now with my content, it's interesting because I'm uploading videos that are over an hour. So an hour 15, sometimes up to 2 hours. So for me, it's really hard because not only do I have a really low retention rate or retention percentage, because even if somebody watches, say, 15 minutes of the video, it's still such a small portion of the content. And so YouTube, the algorithm doesn't really care what kind of content it is. The algorithm cares that that person stayed for 10% of it and then left. Or YouTube algorithm cares if that person stayed for 20 minutes, clicked the like button, left a comment, clicked subscribe, and then left. It's a lot more effective. So if you're someone who's watching long form content and you really appreciate it, the like button helps and the subscribe button helps and notification bell helps, because if you interact with the video before you leave, at least the algorithm knows that the video is worth that interaction, and it's going to say, okay, I'm going to push it to more people because I want other people to have an opportunity to respond in the exact same way. But the retention rate is important. Keeping people on board and listening and responding to your content is a really huge part of content creation. And I think that's true for a lot of things in life, but particularly for content creation. So reaction videos are nice because, number one, you get to have that connection, that camaraderie with the reactor, and you get to experience their emotion and their feelings about something for the first time. Most of the time, sometimes they're reacting to content they've seen before, but a lot of times it'll say like first time reaction. And then the second part, like I said, is sometimes they're just cool people. Like you like the personality, you appreciate them as a person enough that you're willing to come back and you're willing to watch another video, even if you don't recognize the content that they're reacting to. So that's sort of the super secret sauce, the hidden key of being a creator is I have to be likable, I have to be interesting, I have to be intelligent, I have to come off in a way that people are going to come back and they're going to latch on and they're going to want more. And if I'm not, then there's a good chance that the channel and the content you're creating will not succeed, because why would somebody stay and return for the content if they don't care that much about your personality or who you are? So those are a couple of my thoughts on reaction content. Speaking of content creation, I wanted to sort of recap some of my favorite content creators from 2022, some of the channels and from YouTube and from Twitch that I really enjoyed and appreciated, followed pretty steadily, and just sort of structured my entertainment, because that's my main form of entertainment for sure, is just content. YouTube, Twitch, TikTok sometimes, on occasion. TikTok not consistently, but on occasion. And that's where I get a lot of my entertainment. So some of my favorite content creators, and I'll elaborate on a couple of these, but I'm not going to elaborate on all of them. Foosly, Healthy Gamer, Cutie Cinderella and Ludwig, Sunday Sauce Podcast, Small Town Murder Podcast, some of the shows from Twitch like Schooled, Name Your Price, Mogul Money, some of the speedrunners, the speedrunning community, Simply, Cheese, Dobbs, Original 151, vlog content. There were a lot of different channels that I've followed, nothing specific there. A lot of paranormal content. So Overnight Channel, Mackie and Amanda, Paranormal Files, Sam and Colby, who predominantly did paranormal this year. And then, of course, a couple of PokeTubers. I like Pokemon content. Shady Penguin, Nexus, United Gamer, Lex Plays. There are several. Lens, Vandy323. Some of the people I've had on the podcast, if you want to go back and check out their episodes. But a lot of those channels I really like. And then sports, I like Skip and Shannon, Undisputed, First Things First, Bingle, TD Barrett. And I got to throw Good Mythical Morning in there with Rhett and Link because I love the food videos. If I want to watch food content, that's where I'm going. They always do like the Hardee's versus Burger King kind of videos, or they'll do videos where they try like every flavor of Oreo and then they like score all the flavors and then they have a top 4 or something and then they choose like the best one. They do those. They do like Red Lobster versus some other seafood fixture. They'll do like ranking pizza styles of pizza and all sorts of different food stuff. So I really like that. The paranormal stuff, it's long form content, and personally, I love long form content. That's my bread and butter. The video is like hour and a half to 2 hours. I'll be hooked. I'll stay for the whole thing. I'll leave a like and a comment. The speed running, I don't know what it is about the repetition, but I absolutely loved it, particularly for Mario. Super Mario 64 was the big one this year. So Simply, Cheese, Liam, Dobbs. I don't think Dobbs did Super Mario, but he did Pokemon. And then Original 151, Vinny, who I've interacted with before outside of YouTube. When I had Instagram, I sent him some Pokemon cards, and he was nice enough, and a letter. He was nice enough to snap a picture with the cards and post it on Instagram, which I thought was really cool. And we actually interacted a little bit off of YouTube, and I was asking him, he has a PO box set up, so I sent him the Pokemon cards, which was really fun. But all of the Twitch events, like the Streamer Awards, Name Your Price, Mogul Money from Ludwig, while he was still a part of Twitch, of course he's not anymore, but he was. All of those, and then the OTK shows like Schooled and Loot Goblins. All of those shows I enjoyed quite a bit. All of the OTK content was really good in 2022. And I have to give a shout out to Healthy Gamer because I definitely learned more from Dr. K this year than I learned from any other content creator, probably in any other year. I watched so many hours of his interviews with guests talking about mental health. And I have to save him for last and give him the biggest shout out because he's just brilliant, and he's so helpful, and he's so caring and so loving when it comes to his guest. He makes a point to try not to make people feel like they can't share who they are. He makes a point to not make anyone uncomfortable. And if they become uncomfortable, he makes a point to help them along or talk about something else. But he's brilliant, and he talks about psychology, which is a topic that I love. It's what I should have studied in college, and instead of going with the English route or the literature route, I should have gone with psychology. I think that it would have been way more interesting overall, and then also a lot more applicable to like the workforce for me. But he's just, he's a loving person, and he's got a lot of really good humor baked into his dialogue and the conversation too. So if you're intrigued by the idea of mental health, therapy, psychology, psychiatry, please go check out HealthyGamerGG on YouTube or Twitch. He's live on Twitch, I think, most days. And he also uploads VODs and content to YouTube, so you can go back and relive a lot of the interviews. Also on like Spotify and Apple, you can go listen to his talks on there too. It's also Healthy Gamer's been converted into a podcast format there, so it's available in a lot of places. If you want to watch it live, if you want to watch it pre-recorded, or if you want to listen to it in podcast form, check him out. That was probably my favorite creator of 2022. Definitely the one that I took the most from, and the one that I will go back and rewatch and experience all that stuff over and over again. Just a really beautiful person and a really beautiful content creator. So last topic that I had written down that I want to kind of quickly work through, and then we will wrap the episode, is college football, because I rarely ever talk about it. Sports rarely ever comes up on the podcast. it is something that I sort of passively follow and not something that I follow extremely passionately or actively. I sort of just keep track of players and stories and injuries and scores and records and things like that. More of a stats guy than actually like sitting down and watching a game. There are a few Clemson games that I watched this year, like live, but um, we only went, my wife and I went to one Clemson game, and it was really early in the season, and we saw a game at the university, which was really fun. But I've watched a few games as they were being broadcasted. So um, I'm originally from South Carolina, so I'm a Clemson Tiger, and I have sort of been born and bred and trained into that culture of, you know, bleeding orange and being a Tiger. Just that's my dad's team, so that's the team that I always believed in and followed, and it's still the team that I really follow the most. But TCU, shout out to TCU for getting in the college football playoff. You'll see me on occasion wearing my TCU shirt. It's one of my favorite shirts to wear whenever I'm creating or on the podcast. Really cool that TCU made it back to the top 4 programs and made it into the playoff. A little bit annoyed that Ohio State made it in at number 4. They kind of like squeaked in at the backside, but it's okay. I think they're probably one of the 4 best teams, so I think that that's fair. It's just interesting that they sort of squeaked in at the end and and they got in really, they kind of backed into the playoff because other teams were losing and not because they were particularly like beating a lot of really good teams. Their most quality win of the year was Penn State, and that resume doesn't do a lot for me. And then Michigan went to Columbus or they went to Ohio State and just shredded them, just completely dominated them. So I don't have high hopes for Ohio State to get past Georgia. So I guess it's kind of nice that Georgia gets matched up with them in the first round, because they should be able to knock them off pretty easily, hopefully, unless something crazy happens. But predictions, I predict Georgia to win again. I predict Georgia to go back to back. They could even potentially three-peat next year. They could win it again. Their program, their recruiting, their coaching is just on a level that nobody else is on right now. So shout out to Georgia. I feel like Clemson played the best game with them over the past 2 years. Like, we played a 1-score game with them last year. That was the first game of the season, and they weren't starting Stetson Bennett at the time, but it was I think it was a pick 6 that they won the game. But it was a 1-score. It was a 1-score win against Clemson at a neutral site. So I feel like that's one of Clemson's better showings over the past couple seasons. And it's interesting. It's interesting how the teams are ranked, how they're chosen. Obviously, if you go undefeated and you win your conference championship, you're going to be in the playoff. That's just a given. But I am excited to see that expansion coming in the next couple of years, where we're going to go from 4 teams to, I think, 12. And that way you have conference champions, you have the best at-large teams. Everyone's got sort of an equal shot to get in and to compete for the championship. Whereas now they're just sort of voting as a committee on the 4 best teams, and that's really all we get, which is fine. It's cool that they have a system that works, but it will be nice to see 12 teams and more teams having potential and opportunity to get in. It is interesting that USC beat Tennessee and Clemson back to back at the end of the season and sort of ruined both of their chances to get into the playoff. That's an interesting storyline that kind of bugs me. Part of Clemson's problem was the quarterback situation. You know, they started DJU, and he was the starter a little bit too long. And I would agree with Dabo, Coach Sweeney, that, you know, maybe Cade wasn't ready to start for a while, but I think Cade should have started a week earlier than what he did. I think Cade should have started the USC game, and it would be a whole different season. You know, they would be in the playoff probably, and they would have a shot with Cade. Their offense is much, much better. So they would have a shot to compete. They would probably have to play Georgia, and they would probably get run over, but at least they'd be in it. So next season will be interesting to see what the team looks like with the new scheme and the new quarterback and some experience under his belt, because his first start is going to be a bowl game, the Orange Bowl. So that's pretty daunting for a young guy to come in. Although I will say Trevor Lawrence, even though Trevor's an exceptional talent and a way different story when it comes to like physique and talent and instinct, but Trevor, as a true freshman, took the team to a national championship. So you never know. You never know what will happen. And there's a high ceiling for Cade, and he has a lot of potential, I believe. And I don't know. I guess as a whole, the college football season was pretty entertaining. Every week there were upsets. There wasn't like black and white, super clear and super obvious who, the four final teams would be. I think after Michigan beat Ohio State, it was pretty much a lock that Michigan and Georgia would be in, but those other two spots were pretty open. And USC kind of dropped the ball. By the way, speaking of USC, not a fan that Caleb Williams won the Heisman. He was the best player in college football, but I think integrity and character matter. And I just don't see it. It's just not I think Max Duggan, Stetson, even CJ Stroud, much better candidates, and probably one of those guys should have won it. But if the argument is who's the best player in college football, then the correct person won the Heisman. So I will say that. I'll give him that. He, USC would not have won all those games without him. He was the single biggest factor. Where Georgia, you could have plugged a lot of guys into Georgia and they would have won most of their games. I don't know about Ohio State. Maybe they would have won their other games without CJ. And then, Max Duggan had heart surgery. So, he was incredible, a really big contributor. But I think that Caleb Williams was the most important player on his team. And I don't think they win half of those games if he's not starting. So definitely big kudos to him, but just not my favorite pick from the perspective of like integrity and character. But USC really dropped the ball. They could have been in. They could have been in it. And Alabama lost some really close games. And if they had won one or two of those games, they would have been in it. So unfortunate for them, but excited for the playoff as it stands. The four teams we have, excited to see how they do and which team is going to ultimately rise above everybody else. And I think it's going to be Georgia again. I think they're going to repeat, going to be national champs 2 years in a row, but no guarantee on that. It's just sort of my assumption and my expectation. It could be Michigan. But I don't know that Michigan has really proven that they have a team that can beat Georgia. So they're going to have to prove it in game, and Georgia, I think, would have to have sort of a bad game for Michigan to really have a shot at winning it all. So that's really my general assessment of the college football season. Again, it was a lot of fun. I got to see a game in person, which was a lot of fun. Got to go along for the emotional roller coaster of my Clemson Tigers. And we got to see the four best teams in the playoff. So we'll see what happens on, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day and all the big bowls. We'll see kind of where it goes and who emerges victorious. So before I wrap, I just like to say I appreciate everybody who watches the podcast. I appreciate everybody who listens to the podcast. I appreciate the engagement. Anytime there's a like, anytime there's a subscriber, someone who's willing to take a shot on it and stay along for the ride, it is greatly appreciated. I obviously don't do a lot of administrative discussion whenever I record because I want to focus on the guest. So this is a nice opportunity for me because I get to kind of talk about stuff. And I know it's at the end, so a lot of people aren't watching or listening, but still get to talk about it. And as I mentioned earlier, engagement is a big deal. So if you are a fan, please hit the notification bells. Please click the like button, leave a comment because it does make a big difference. And stay for the video. If you are engaged and if you're enjoying it, watch it. If you watch it, that retention time, that time that you're watching it helps out a lot too. So with that, I'm going to wrap the episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was a different format and a different scenario, but we'll be back next week with a guest. So we'll be back to normal. Appreciate everybody for watching, and we'll see you next time.